There you have it, folks. That was my Licorice, my clarinet, and it was alive with Move, composed by the bebop drummer Denzil Best. And famously, Move was included in Miles Davis's breakthrough album, Birth of the Cool. And for those of you that haven't heard it, Birth of the Cool was a nonette, meaning a sort of mini big band of 9 players that offered up complex arrangements and was a departure from the small combo bebop sound that was dominating the scene in the later 40s and early 50s. So that was my little stripped-down version of Move, courtesy of my little IMDb Pro tracks there playing behind me. Move was also recorded by Stan Getz and Chet Baker. And Chet really shows that he was more than a singer, but really also a very sophisticated trumpet soloist in his own right. But my fave version of Move is on the Art Pepper classic, Pepper Plus 11. Now, Art Pepper was an LA giant, and he was one of the few white players who made the Central Avenue jazz scene back in the late 40s and early 50s. And he also wrote what I think is the greatest jazz biography ever written, called Straight Time. Check it out. His life was a wild ride, to say the least, but he was really a great horn player. Okay, here we are. Hello again. Welcome to Rebel Without Applause, coming to you, as it always does, from my movie studio apartment right here in the Wood of the Holly, under the sign that overlooks the enchanted land of law. As always, I'm trying my best to break it down jazz-wise, joke-wise, culture-wise, and otherwise. And I have a confession to make. I have been tethered to my desk and my computer and my ambition for so long. Sometimes I just have to cut that cord, release myself from the day-to-day trials of life in the fame game. Sometimes I just have to escape the digital tendrils of the billionaire brat boy, you know, the predator-in-chief, the grand dragon, the PVP, by that I mean Putin's vice president, and I just have to get off the grid and hit the road, if you get my drift. And for me, the road I like to hit, and hell, I've been pounding it for years, is the old Camino Sierra, commonly referred to as U.S. Route 395. A ribbon of asphalt that winds its way from San Bernardino up through the mighty Mojave and then makes a steady ascent just behind the snow-capped eastern rim of the mighty Sierra Nevada into the fabled Owens Valley and beyond, where the trout still live, where the secret hot springs are. Every cell in my body told me to go, and go I did. The first stop of notable interest on my SoCal odyssey into the back of beyond was just a few minutes from where I sit right here in the Wood of the Holly. Located at the northern edge of the San Fernando Valley and tucked up against the western flank of the San Gabriel Mountains is the Silmar Cascade. The closest thing we have to Niagara Falls here in La La Land, this watery spillway, is the last link of Mulholland's masterpiece, the 233-mile-long Los Angeles Aqueduct. And it was at the base of that very same spillway in 1914 that the chief, by that I mean William F. Mulholland, the head of the Department of Water and Power, he stood on a small platform and pulled a lever. And then, as if by magic, well, it wasn't magic, it was good old-fashioned engineering, but either way, the first gallons of crystal-clear Sierra snowmelt roared down the spillway. Then William F. Mulholland turned to the mayor and a small gathering of Angelinos assembled below and uttered the most famous words ever spoken in the land of law. He turned to them and he said, "There it is, take it." And take it they did. The water flowed out of the Sierra Nevada into the toilet bowls and bathtubs, swimming pools, and orange groves. And as the water flowed, so did the dollars by the millions. The formerly dry expanse of the San Fernando was bought up on the cheap by a handful of Southern California land barons. Then the land was incorporated into the city and then into an agricultural bonanza. Southern California citrus was shipped around the globe, fortunes were massed, political power consolidated, and the 20th century kicked into high gear. With water and sunshine and no patent enforcement, the movie moguls came. Those beautiful studios were built. Oil wells sprouted like palm trees. Then the Okies, with their guitars and pitchforks, piled into their pickups and Model Ts and streamed across the great western desert into their paradise found. With World War II, battleships were built, bombers manufactured. Then those orchards in the old San Fernando got carved into a checkerboard of suburban subdivisions with strip malls and mini malls and maxi malls and parking lots and high schools and golf courses. By the go-go 50s, multi-lane ribbons of asphalt extended like snakes across the SoCal coastal plain. Hot rods and dune buggies, convertibles and caddies swarmed the big boulevards that crisscrossed the old San Fernando, now called the Valley. It was real estate heaven. Formerly barren tracts of nothingness got attractive names like Van Nuys, Sherman Oaks, Tarzana, Encino, Porter Ranch, Chatsworth, Woodland Hills, Granada Hills. Kids, car culture, rock and roll, and golden arches conquered all. And with that, for better or worse, and probably both, a modern megalopolis was born. But it all started with Mulholland's Aqueduct, which to this day is owned and operated by our very own Department of Water and Power, which I think should be renamed the Department of Water is Power, if you get my drift. Drag-free, if you know what I mean. Of course, up in the Owens Valley, from where that water was purloined, the crops withered, the cattle died. With the water diverted, bankruptcy and ruin ensued. Naturally, the ranchers and farmers up there were justifiably incensed. They were fucked and swindled and hoodwinked by Mulholland and the surrogate DWP land speculators. And those rancher folk and their children and their children's children have been justifiably pissed for the better part of the last century. Of course, it does bear noting that the ranchers and farmer folk up there in the Owens Valley had, only just a generation before, swiped the very same land and very same water from the Paiutes and Shoshone and Washoe people who had been up there hunting and gathering and petroglyphing since the last ice age. But hey, who's counting? Payback can be a motherfucker. And all of these events provided ample fodder for one brilliant screenwriter named Robert Towne, who used this epic story of water and power and corruption and theft to craft the noir masterpiece Chinatown. But Towne took artistic license and transposed these events from when they occurred in 1914 to a Depression-era 1930s, which fit much more comfortably into the detective story genre that he was hell-bent to explore, which I personally have no problem with. After all, sometimes there's more truth in the legend than there is in the truth. By that I mean, sometimes you have to sprinkle some fiction on the facts to bring out the meaning. If you get my drift, drag-free, if you know what I mean. So, where was I? Oh yeah, with my blue Subaru, chock full of camping and fly fishing gear, I was headed up into the Mojave Desert. I zipped past Jawbone Canyon, a forbidding, tumbleweed-dotted crease at the southern base of the Sierra Nevada, and if you knew where to look, you could see the huge pipes that the Mulholland mule teams hauled into place to transport the liquid gold. The whole aqueduct enterprise was a miracle of engineering. With every canyon and every ridge, the pipes descended in elevation ever so slightly, inviting gravity to do its work, pulling the water down, canyon by canyon, gorge by gorge, ridge by ridge, till the water reached the enchanted land of La. A little bit farther up the road, I curved slowly up a shallow grade past Red Rock Canyon into the high desert where Highway 14 merges with the Camino Sierra, US 395. Off to my right, I could see the desert community of Ridgecrest, which was at the epicenter of a pair of earthquakes that only 2 weeks ago rocked our world and served as a reminder that we mere mortals are just bugs on an elephant's back One swish of the tail, and we are scattered and gone. And then it hit me in a flash. If the big one hits and Cali falls into the sea, Ridgecrest might very well be the site of some pretty awesome beachfront property. Who knows? If the continents keep drifting and those tectonic plates keep grinding, I might be looking down on what could, in the next 10 million years or so, be some pretty awesome surf spots. Think of it. Gorgeous point breaks, magic carpet rides of saltwater joy waiting to be claimed, fenced, and privatized. Maybe I should drive on down and introduce myself to some real estate folks. Do what Mulholland did. Get on the ground floor. If you get my drift, drag free. But then I thought better. What the hell? The surf's still good at Malibu. I'll keep on driving, onward and upward. Out to my right, the Coso Mountains loomed large, and inside those mountains, ancient peoples lived sometime after the last ice age. And folks, if you're a fan of petroglyphs, by that I mean rock art or ancient graffiti, there are some canyons back in there that make the Louvre Museum look quaint. If you want to see them, you can check out my Facebook page or my YouTube vid on my YouTube page. It's called Time Tripping in the Mojave. Check it out. It's worth it. But that's another story. I got to keep moving. No time for detours. I want to hit the rivers, cast my line. There are big browns and fat rainbows waiting for me. I want to soak in my secret hot springs. It was all waiting for me. If you get my drift, drag free. So I motored up the asphalt escalator into the lower reaches of the Owens Valley. Dotted by cacti, the landscape is surrounded by cinder cones and lava flows. I can only imagine what this place looked like a million or so years ago. Smoke and fire billowing out of the ground, huge columns of molten rock, sludge-like and horrific, flowing down the mountainside, gobbling everything in its past. So prehistoric, so wild. Finally, me and my blue Sub emerged over a crest and came upon what looked like a massive salt flat, a white expanse of toxic, dusty nothingness, a sea of lifeless tranquility, a moonscape. But this ain't the moon. It's what was once a giant blue inland sea known as, yeah, you guessed it, Owens Lake. But we know where that water went. Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown or La La Land. After that, I headed up past Lone Pine, and looming above the town are a heaping pile of sandstone boulders known as the Alabama Hills, and behind the hills a rugged string of snow-capped and forbidding granite peaks that include Mount Whitney, which at 14,000 feet is the highest point in the whole goddamn continental United States. If you didn't know it, you might as well be at the foot of the mighty Himalayas, which is what the director George Stevens bet on when he brought his movie company up there in 1938 to film Gunga Din. Yep, this dramatic landscape proved a worthy stand-in for the Khyber Pass and the Hindu Kush, which was, in the 1880s, the mountainous northern flank of the British Empire in India and was the central movie location for one of the great imperialist romps in cinema history. Adapted from the Rudyard Kipling epic poem by the legendary screenwriting duo of Ben Hecht and Charles MacArthur, those are the same guys that brought you the front page, Gunga Din starred a very young and very dashing Gary Cooper with Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Victor McLaughlin, and with Sam Jaffe playing Gunga Din, the little Indian water boy who yearns to be a British soldier. And lucky Indian water boy that he is, Gunga Din gets the rare privilege of dying for the English queen and thus becomes a hero for the ages. Anyway, these swashbucklers do battle with the fierce local tribes, and for a very brief moment, at the point of rifle and cannon, these intrepid Brits bring peace and civilization to the region, which I find ironic because at this very moment, intrepid U.S. soldiers are still fighting to bring peace and civilization to those very same tribes in the very same region, which is today known as Afghanistan. Funny how history works. If you get my drift, drag free. Another great movie that was filmed along Old 395 is High Sierra, released in 1941 and co-written by John Huston. High Sierra offers up one of Humphrey Bogart's best performances. He stars as a newly released con, Mad Dog Earl, who gets caught up in a caper gone south and pays for it with his life. Directed by Warner Brothers veteran Raoul Walsh and also starring Ida Lupino and Arthur Kennedy, High Sierra was an early noir gangster film and was instrumental in launching Bogart into superstar status. It also started his relationship with John Huston, which later resulted in the masterpiece, The Treasure of Sierra Madre. Add those performances to Bogart's Duke Mantee in The Petrified Forest, and the bogey bad boy legend is etched into cinema eternity. Anyway, they shot the climactic sequence of High Sierra up above Lone Pine on the road that leads up to Whitney Portal. Really authentic, really exciting stuff. Check it out. Another noteworthy Alabama Hills movie was Bad Day at Black Rock, which starred Spencer Tracy, Robert Ryan, my fave, Lee Marvin, and Ernest Borgnine. Tracy, in the story, visits a small desert town to visit a Japanese man whom he discovers was killed by racist locals, which is ironic because just a stone's throw from Lone Pine is Manzanar, the internment camp where large segments of the SoCal Japanese community were illegally and unconstitutionally sequestered during World War II. As you drive by, you can still see the old guard towers. The place has the look of a stalag or a concentration camp without the gas chambers. Thank God for that. All right, where was I? Oh, yeah, I finally made it. Past Independence and Big Pine and Bishop, up above the gorge, past Crowley, then 5 or 6 miles across a cattle-covered meadow owned by, yeah, you guessed it, La La Land's very own Department of Water and Power. And finally, with my car covered in alkaline dust, I arrived at the grassy banks of the Owens River. And because of the big winter, the water was running fast and deep, which makes for difficult fishing. But thankfully, up here, much of the water is yet to be diverted into Mulholland's masterpiece. And this winding stretch of river can offer up prolific fly fishing for rainbows and big browns. The rainbows and browns are there for the catching and releasing if, and only if, you know what you're doing. And sometimes I do, and oftentimes I don't. I've been fly fishing for decades. I have a carbon fiber sage rod, Sims waders, a vest full of clippers and hemostats and fly floating. I have boxes of every imaginable imitation of dry fly, nymph, streamer, and grasshopper, and whatever. If it crawls, if it swims, or if it flies, I have the feathered impression of that creature in my box. If the fish are rising, by that I mean sipping at the surface for the ever-present caddis and mayfly hatches, I can be deadly. When it comes to dry fly fishing, I've got game. But if the trout are not enticed to the surface and are, as they usually do, feeding in the depths or under the cut banks on nymphs, by that I mean the subsurface insect life, the angling gets more complicated, more technical, more frustrating. If the fish ain't rising, my arsenal of dry flies are staying in the box. Nymph I must, and nymph I will. If you get my drift, drag free. You see, that's the trick. You want to catch fish when they aren't feeding on the surface. You got to learn how to present that nymph underwater with drag-free drift. And that takes skill and practice and patience and the right combination of rod, fly line, leader, and tippet. If you can't get the drift drag free and floating naturally, no self-respecting salmonoid is going to give you a look-see or a tug or even a hello. If you can't get the drift drag free, you might as well go back home. You're just casting at windmills. Now, a lot of the guides and know-it-all locals have adopted a new technique for nymph fishing, which I am still working on. It's called Euro-nymphing, a deadly combination of leader, line, and tippet. The idea is to create so little disturbance on the water and to adroitly offer up the nymph at the correct depth, right above the trout's nose, that the creature can't resist. So while I was flailing on the river, I looked up the river and spotted a local guide working the cut banks. And he was pulling out the trout, nice-sized natives, at regular intervals. What the fuck was he doing? My jealousy and interest was piqued. Later in the day, I ambled over and we got to talking. A friendly, enterprising sort, he showed me his Euro nymph rig and his business card. Fred Rowe, fly fishing specialist, High Sierra guide. Like myself, he was a refugee from the San Fernando. Fred had been working this stretch of the Owens for decades. Anyway, he kind of gave me some pointers, and I went back to my bend of the river. And I was fortunate to pick off a few hand-sized browns, but no record breakers. Still, I caught fish. And with the snow-capped Sierras looming overhead, I was where I needed to be, in my element, off the grid, and at one with the river. If you get my drift, drag free. So there you have it, folks. Thanks for hanging with me. That's another installment of A Rebel Without Applause. One more reminder, if you like this, hey, let me know. Cast me a line, throw me an email, like it on iTunes, rate it, review it, whatever you need to do. And if you didn't, keep it to yourself. Another reminder, don't forget, please, to catch up to my audio movie production of William Shakespeare's Othello, The Moor of Venice. That's available for the taking on episodes 12 through 16, right here on A Rebel Without Applause. And so, till next time, adios, goodbye, and adieu.